the left has a glorious history at the cultural front, on the labor front. The Constitution of Pakistan, by the way, is one of the most left-wing constitutions in the world. It talks about eliminating exploitation. It talks about eliminating class difference. It talks about the right to health, education. The economy is a political discussion. Political independence is one thing, but economic independence is what we need, both from imperialism as well as from parasitic classes within Pakistan.
Hello, friends. Welcome to Fiscal Focus on DawnNews English. This is Danish Khan, and today I'm joined by Dr. Ammar Ali Jan. He's an historian and a scholar practitioner who engages with grassroots movements and organization in Pakistan. Thank you, Ammar, for joining me today.
Glad to be here, Danish.
So I want to start our discussion with the following. So there is a universal consensus in Pakistan that the development trajectory of Pakistan has been suboptimal in past 7 decades. But there's a lot of contention in terms of specifying what are the core reasons or the contradictions in Pakistan development trajectory. So I would like your take on it. How do you conceptualize core contradictions in Pakistan's development trajectory?
Well, broadly speaking, at independence, countries, post-colonial countries like Pakistan had two basic options, and this is a very universal kind of an experience throughout the Third World. One was a developmentalist trajectory, which meant that not only would you have to develop your industrial base, your technological base, in order to catch up to the West, which has historically denied development to the colonial world, but you would also have to fight those internal groups within society that were holding society back and who were beneficiaries of the system. So kind of a social and political revolution as necessary for economic transformation. That was the kind of one path that was open, and this was advocated by nationalists, by socialists, by third world leaders. There's an entire history of the Bandung Conference around this idea where leaders from the third world wanted this kind of a developmentalist path. And in that, they were coming into contradiction both with US empire as well as internal forces, including the establishments, including feudal landlords and others who were beneficiaries of colonialism. The other path open for countries like Pakistan was one in which these countries did this dependent development, which meant that they relied on the markets of the Western world and started providing cheap sources of raw material, primary goods, did not really develop their own industries. However, the elites, which were then called comprador elites who were benefiting from this neo-colonial system, they started seeking rents from the US and other Western countries. So what that did is that truncated any kind of a long-term developmental project, because for this, you did not need any kind of social reform, any land reforms, any long-term industrial planning, any kind of educational setup that could develop the base for the technological development that was needed. And this path also meant more authoritarianism and dictatorship, because the general move of history, the general tendency since the anti-colonial movement everywhere was one of reform, if not revolution. And this trajectory foreclosed that reform. And in order to foreclose that, it had to use violence. Often, this whole mushrooming of US-backed military dictatorships across the third world is very much part of this history in which both the US and elites in the third world try to reverse the trend of history, which was towards redistribution and technological progress in the third world. And once these elites became dependent on rent seeking, it wasn't just limited to primary goods. It was also rent seeking for geostrategic reasons. So renting out your geostrategic location, which is something Pakistan has done again and again. And thus we got locked into this trajectory where we had a parasitic elite that was extremely rich, that relied on the West, but it was not productive. It could not bear its own expenses, and hence it would run the country, run society on borrowed money. And every time you had to repay the loans, they would place the burden on the working classes by taxing them, by administering austerity, by cutting social benefits. And I think that's where Pakistan is right now.
Yeah. You mentioned working classes and you engage with young people in Pakistan and also the working classes and labor movements in Pakistan. So, two parts of my questions here. Part A, is labor or a working class still a relevant category to think about
Mhm.
politics and economic development in Pakistan? And second, what are some core issues faced by working classes in Pakistan?
Well, I think it's a very, very important category. Broadly speaking, what do we mean when we say working class, working people? We say the most productive people in society, because these are people who are not living on the labor of others. They are not exploiting the labor of others. They're the ones who are producing everything that we use in our daily lives. These are the people who make the trains run. These are the people who make the cars, make the roads. Everything that we use, consume in our daily lives, it comes from the working people. This is the least parasitic class of society, and yet, because the entire system is built upon an exploitation, a monopoly over the labor, the work of these people. They have no representation. They have no representation in parliament. They have no representation in political parties. They have no representation within the state. So the state is organized in such a way that the labor, the hard work of this productive class um, is exploited, and in return they are denied development. When we say Pakistan has not developed, we don't mean the Pakistani elites. The Pakistani elites, if you look at the housing market in Dubai or London or elsewhere, you'll see that they've done pretty well for themselves. It's a success story. But when we say Pakistan has failed, we mean the middle classes, the working classes, people who actually have to work to put bread on their table, and it's they who are going hungry. It's they who don't have access to clean water. I mean, about 80 to 90% of people in Pakistan don't have access to clean water, and this is working people. We have a World Bank report that says 45% of people are now living below the poverty line. That means that they do not know whether they'll be able to get their next meal or not. About 40% of people die due to waterborne diseases, diseases that the West only knows in Charles Dickens' novels from the 19th century. Similarly, unemployment is rising, agriculture is stagnating. So working people are experiencing a catastrophe, and also they feel, many of them feel there's no future when you have 25 million children out of school. I mean, a certain future is foreclosed for them. That is also the reason why we hear about so many people risking their lives to get to the shores of Europe and drowning in the middle. People from Pakistan have repeatedly tried doing that, and nobody likes doing that. It's their desperation, because these are hardworking people. If they were given a chance, and you can see that in Europe, or Pakistanis who work hard, they do well. In America, they do well. In Saudi, Dubai, like all of these countries are built by the labor of Pakistanis. But in Pakistan, their labor is exploited massively in these societies as well. But imagine if we were able to give them a dignified life in Pakistan and use this kind of pool to develop our technology, to develop our industry. Pakistanis would be living lives of dignity, and we would not be humiliated by institutions like the IMF that basically are dictating almost every aspect of our economic life. So the working people and what happens to the working people is a central question, and we're failing our working people, and this is why Pakistan's economy is where it is.
Now, following up on your earlier response, some may argue that Pakistan was on the upward economic trajectory, especially under the regime of General Ayub Khan, and it has been touted as a great example of development. Uh, and it was only because of the civilian politicians and the democracy which led to the demise of that developmental regime. How would you respond to that argument?
Oh, I think it's just a factually incorrect argument. That development in the 1960s was a kind of dependent development on the US. It was a parasitic form of development. Those business families that owned everything, basically the monopoly of the 22 families, and Mehboob Haq Saab wrote that report where he exposed that kind of concentration of wealth that was happening mostly in West Pakistan. It not only created class conflict within West Pakistan, but also between the West and the Eastern wings, which eventually led to the tragedy of 1971. This entire great boom, so-called, that so many economists used to tout. The decline started by 65, 66 when the relations with the US started cooling off. So it was a totally path dependent development that was dependent on the whims of the US. And this has been the major problem, the question of sovereignty, despite the fact that that successive governments like to brand anyone who's a dissident a traitor. If you look at our relationship with sovereignty, that's been very weak. We only develop when the US is ready to use us for some kind of geostrategic purposes. So initially, in the 50s, 60s, it was tied to the Cold War. And again, as I said, after 65, 66, those relations started cooling and the economy also started crumbling. Then in the 80s, we had the Afghan Jihad. And once the Afghan Jihad was over, the economy was shattered. And then once again, in 2001, we had the war on terror. So, these are these flows of dollars that we were dependent upon, they were very much tied to wars in our region, to geopolitical conflict in the region, and that is how this development took place. And in this entire process, I think the fact that in the 60s, 80s, and 2000s, we did not have representation, and these dictators limited the scope for democracy. It really hurt us. Now, imagine if during the Afghan Jihad, we had a functioning parliament, we had democratic governments, and if there was a serious debate on what needs to be done, not just the history of Pakistan and Afghanistan, but of the entire region would have been different. Similarly, after 9/11, we changed our policy over one phone call. And before that, Cito Cento in the 1950s, these were military pacts with the US that were never discussed in parliament. But what these dictatorial decisions did is they locked Pakistan onto this path where it depended upon dollars that were associated with wars in the region. And that is the worst way to develop, because even when you're developing, your development is tied to destruction in the region. And that cannot be sustainable. And if an elite depends on these war dollars, then they don't have to improve schools, they don't have to improve universities, hospitals, they don't have to import or create the latest technology. They don't have to basically compete with the world. They can simply seek geostrategic rents. And this is what our elites have been doing. And this is why we are where we are.
Yeah, no, good points, because there were many countries who did ally with or did align with the US and the other Western capitalist economies and did develop in part South Korea. It was in Pakistan, it was a very special kind of settlement which was focused on rent seeking and
Mhm.
in geostrategic gains rather than economic gains. You mentioned sovereignty, and it's an interesting concept. And this is a budget season. So, and when we look at budget document, it shows that Pakistan Finance Ministry operates within the constraints imposed by
Mhm.
IMF. So, how do you see this exercise of budget making in Pakistan? And a lot of people, especially working classes, do tend to look at budget as an important event. How do you see it?
Well, I think it's a banker's budget, and that's been the case for over 3 decades now, since the first structural adjustment programs in the late 1980s. The IMF really has been basically not just giving guidelines. It started literally getting involved in the details, the nitty-gritty details of how to run the finance ministry. And it got so bad that even now our finance ministers, nobody knows them. They who they are before they become finance ministers. These are not political people. These are not people who can be held accountable. The current one is a banker. Then there was someone from the IMF. Previously, then there have been people from the World Bank. Then an IMF employee was brought in as the head of the central bank of the State Bank of Pakistan. So I mean, it's incredible that when an institution negotiates with a country, then both sides come prepared, and there's negotiations over money even in a family are very tough. Imagine when countries and institutions are negotiating. Instead, you basically have this revolving door where the IMF has created a situation where it negotiates with itself and it's negotiating with Pakistan. And what it's done since the 1990s is that it has killed any kind of even any pretense of a national development plan. Now there's now, for example, banks have been deregulated. And one thing that this deregulation has done is that previously, when governments could push these banks to offer loans for industrial development or agriculture, now these banks have no incentive to do that. Instead, they've been allowed to lend to governments on commercial rates. Now, if I'm running a bank, uh, instead of investing in something risky, which might eventually lead to industrial development, why shouldn't I just give it to my friends in the government who will have to repay it to me? And if they mess it up, if the money goes off to, let's say, ends up in the real estate in Qatar or Dubai or elsewhere, then it's not a problem. You can always cut the education budget, the health budget. You can always increase taxes on the working people. This time, the salaried classes, as they're called in Pakistan, they've been charged about 500 billion rupees. So this is extraction. 46% of our budget is being spent for debt servicing, which means to return the money that we've borrowed from financial institutions, both international and local. But where did that money go? Why don't we have industry? Why don't we have development? Why is our agriculture stagnating? So that money went into speculation, into housing societies, or God knows where. Uh, who will then repay that money? It's the salaried classes. So literally, people are sacrificing their lives, their futures, the futures of their children, so that our elites can continue with their luxuries in Dubai or Paris or London or wherever it is that they party. And that kind of is the basic problem. This is debt slavery. This is a kind of tendency in which all of society has been imposed on all of society, and people have to work hard now in order to repay the loans that someone else took, and there cannot be a greater injustice.
Yeah, and there have been arguments of odious debt in the case of Africa, but
Mm.
don't hear much about that in the case of Pakistan. Now, moving on, one constant theme in Pakistan's political economy and development trajectory has been the civil military contradictions. So, and the
Mm.
most recent version of it is the Imran Khan-led PTI and military and current military establishment. So, how do you conceptualize this a recurring contradiction, and what's your position on it, especially from the lens of progressive and left?
Well, I mean, as far as the left is concerned, it's very clear we'll always stand for the Constitution and for civilian supremacy. And we want to push it further to include working people, middle classes, and develop a project of sovereign economic development that can actually meet the needs of the people. On the other hand, whenever a democratic government is overthrown or a civilian leader is jailed, uh, while our natural tendency is to condemn that, and that's been done throughout history, there's also responsibility on the other side to build coalitions. And I mean, all these governments have always been very tough on the left. I mean, the left is in Pakistan at some point was strong. It's in the process of rebuilding. but it's always marginalized and repressed by successive governments, civilian or military. And if and that's been the case even in recent years. So I think the task for all democratic forces is to see how they can build consensus, build broad fronts, united fronts, because we do need united fronts. There's no doubt about that. But the left has been ready and has been raising voice for different marginalized groups. But others also have to take an initiative to build that broad front. And something similar to the 1980s when we had the MRD, the Movement for the Restoration of Democracy, where forces from across the spectrum were able to come together to fight against the dictatorship of General Ziaul Haq and to defend the constitution. I think Pakistan may need a similar movement in the coming months and years.
Now, critics may argue that left or progressives don't exist politically in Pakistan, but you associate yourself as progressive leftist and work in communities across Pakistan. So, how do you see the future of left and progressive politics, and more importantly, progressive alternative in the realm of economic development?
Well, it's interesting that all these people who say that the left doesn't exist are also the ones who call upon the government to arrest leftists, to fire them from universities. It was these people and their governments that placed sedition cases on myself and my comrades. Also, a number of us were fired from our jobs. So if you're not that threatening, then why do they feel so threatened? I think they feel threatened because they know that there's a real gap in Pakistani politics. And the gap is that the ordinary working people, the students, the women, the farmers, the factory workers, the growing middle classes, they do not have adequate political representation. And the political parties, the way they're structured, they are incapable of providing effective leadership to these groups. And these are the majority groups, these are the many. And there can come a situation where the many can be united against the few. This is the source of our hope. We've shown glimpses of that in a number of movements. Of course, the student movement in 2019 was one of them that we've been working with, as you pointed out, in different working class communities. And it always politics that is against the general thrust of the time. It always takes a while. But there is a moment when an idea's time comes, and I think the gap in Pakistani politics, the vacuum, it suggests that there needs to be a different kind of politics in the mainstream, and we're in the middle of rebuilding the left. The left has a glorious history at the cultural front, on the labor front. The Constitution of Pakistan, by the way, is one of the most left-wing constitutions in the world. I mean, other than the fact that on social issues it's not as great as it should be, but on economic issues it's more radical than most European or even constitutions of the global South. It talks about eliminating exploitation. It talks about eliminating class difference. It talks about the right to health, education. It's a charter of rights, and this happened. It's no coincidence that the Constitution, which was formed in 1973, occurred a few years after one of the greatest left-wing movements in the world at the time, the 68, 69 movement in Pakistan, which united both the eastern and western wings, in which trade union leaders, farmers leaders, and student leaders combined to overthrow the dictatorship and then eventually pushed for reform. Now, a lot of things happened in the middle, including elections and civil war, but that entire history and its energy is what helped create this constitution, which again, I would say in its economic content is very much a left-wing constitution. And it's that legacy that we have to hold on to and recreate in the present, because it's needed more in the present with 45% of our people living below poverty line and others, of course, on the edge of falling into poverty. We need a strong left-wing platform, and we need to politicize the economy, to reiterate this again and again, that the economy is not something that can be left to the bankers who are making a bonanza. The economy is a political discussion. It's a space for contestation, particularly for the most marginalized, and depoliticizing the economy is the greatest way in which the elites conduct their class struggle by even denying the possibility of negotiation and dialogue on the most important aspects of our lives. And this is where the battle needs to take shape, which is one of economic freedom. Political independence is one thing, but economic independence is what we need, both from imperialism as well as from parasitic classes within Pakistan.
Thank you so much, Ammar, for sharing your perspective. This is Danish Khan signing off.